I spent an entire week climbing up the Appalachian ecosystem, flipping over 1,000 rocks, searching for snakes. This area has some of the most beautiful and notoriously venomous snakes this region has to offer. From the deep moss-covered ravines and rushing river valleys, to rare cedar glades, and finally reaching the rugged mountain slopes above. Hey guys, I'm Zachary Gray, and today, me and Emily will be exploring the mountains of Tennessee, searching for snakes. To me, the Appalachian Mountains don't really begin at the peaks and vistas that most people would think about, but rather the low, carved-out ravines, valleys, and the hollers of the mountains, where water has slowly shaped these rocky landscapes into some incredible wildlife habitat. Mushrooms! Mushrooms! Chicken of the woods. It's the Appalachian special. I could technically take a bite out of this. But to find our target snakes, we would have to check a lot of rocks. Snakes especially like to hang out under rocks in or around these ravines to regulate their temperature and to hunt for smaller prey like lizards and small rodents. Now we're going to a little ravine down here. Every rock is a possibility at a small glimpse into a very hidden ecosystem. And it didn't take us too long before we turned up our first snake. That is a little eastern milk snake. He's in shed, he's in blue, so he's very dark colored right now. But this is one of my favorite snakes that lives up here in the Appalachian Mountains. Now he's gonna be a little more light tan coloration whenever he sheds. If you look there, he's got a checkered belly. A lot of people would confuse this snake for a corn snake up here. And they're friendly, super friendly snake. They will sometimes bite, but this one, as you can see, he's very friendly. Now I actually just found this snake hiding under a rock, kind of in an open little sunny patch, and that's the kind of habitat that these snakes enjoy hanging out in. And then they'll sometimes come down into these little ravines, hunting for little skinks and little rodent nests. They really love their big rock ledges. That's one of their favorite places to hang out, are these rock ledges, mostly just for hunting lizards and having a really good place to hang out in the winter. They're a really cool snake. He's got a little red tongue there, and they're one that a lot of people really enjoy looking for up here. But they're not particularly rare. They pop up on farmland, in people's houses. They can pop up virtually anywhere, but this is your prime eastern milk habitat. We're gonna go ahead and put this guy back and keep looking for our venomous snakes, but that's awesome. Little eastern milk snake. Now the Appalachian Mountains are really good for snakes, but what they're actually a hot spot for is salamanders. In fact, in just the surrounding region right here, there are over 50 different species living in just this small region alone. And that's a really good sign for all of our other target species. Wow. This is like perfect habitat. Be a red somewhere in here. Oh, baby red. Have a look at that. See him?
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Zach, that is so adorable. Hello, little baby.
I mean, this is just perfect salamander habitat. And this is a baby red. They look brown when they're tiny like this. But what I'm really looking for is a big adult midland red. Not only are salamanders prey for many other species, but they're also a great indicator of a healthy environment. And where you have cool salamanders, you're oftentimes going to have some other really cool reptiles. Following the ravine, we eventually hit the river, where we get into a whole stack of good-looking rocks and a lot more potential species. The fish and other aquatic invertebrates provide food for a whole stack of different snakes, including a very unique aquatic snake that calls these rivers home. And of course, one of the most common species in this region. All right, well, we're on the board with this little baby northern water snake. Now this guy's actually a newborn. Fun fact about water snakes is they actually give birth to live young. So somewhere along this rock face, there's probably a big adult female northern water snake who just dropped a bunch of babies, this being one of them. So we're certainly in a good area for snakes. Very cute little neonate northern water snake. Now this is not the aquatic snake that we're looking for along this creek, but it is definitely a great addition to any day out here in the mountains. Rivers are absolute prime habitat for northern water snakes, which is probably why they're the most frequently encountered snake along the Appalachian waterways. We saw so many of these snakes just hanging out on limbs and virtually everywhere you could look. They're generalist predators, which means they tend to show up first when you start flipping rocks near moving water. But a lot of times you'll only see the smaller ones. And while continuing to look for our less common aquatic species, we spotted an absolute tank. I just saw a huge water snake over here. I mean, just monstrous. Where did it go? Oh, yeah, there it is. Got him. Got him. Oh, that is pretty. Well, here we go, guys. This is a much more acceptable northern water snake. Now, notice I'm holding him kind of weird here. He's got a huge meal in his belly, and I don't want him to regurgitate it. Now, I had to really check to make sure that this wasn't a gravid female at first, otherwise I wouldn't have grabbed him. Really nice example of a northern water snake, and you'll see that belly. I mean, this is probably one of the prettiest northern water snakes I've ever seen. Woo! Tagged me right when I caught him, right on the finger, but they're totally non-venomous species. They oftentimes get killed. People think that they're water moccasins, but they look a good bit different, and this isn't exactly water moccasin habitat. Wow, what a great snake. A little bit bigger than that one we found before. Probably one of the most common water snakes in the US, but definitely a great example of one. And while I was off busy playing with water snakes, Emily actually spotted our target species, just barely visible on the edge of a rock. All right, that's a queen snake. That's exactly what we were looking for. Exactly how I figured we'd see it. So what's gonna happen is he's probably gonna tuck under the rock. Yep. All right, I gotta flip the rock quickly and grab it.
Did you get him?
Yep.
You got him, you got him, you got him!
Well, this is exactly the snake that we were looking for up in these riffraff. This is a queen snake. Very cool little river species up here. They're kind of like our crawfish snakes down south. And that's exactly what they eat. They eat little crawfish, or as they're called up here, crayfish, up and along these rocks. Now, they're normally hiding under rocks that are half in the water, half out. And as we saw right there, it was sticking its head out from a rock. Emily spotted it, and I was able to come and flip the rock and catch it. That's normally the best way to catch a queen snake. And that's exactly how we got this snake here. Really nice big one too, big female. Very, very pretty. They're pretty camouflaged up and amongst these rocks, and pretty much everything would eat them up in here. Herons, snapping turtles, a bigger snake. So they really rely on good rock habitat and good riffraff. And as you can see behind me, this is the absolute perfect habitat to see a queen snake in. Now, queen snakes actually heavily rely on freshly molted crawfish as a food source, which means they can be found a lot more commonly in well-oxygenated waterways like this one. Encounters with them are always a really good sign that an ecosystem is somewhat functioning the way that it should. But as productive as these rivers are, our more notorious vipers are likely to be found at higher elevations. They're pretty widespread throughout the Northeast. You'll find these guys all over the United States. And they're probably the most successful crawfish snake in the US. Definitely the snake that we wanted to see here, so I think we're done hanging out on this river. All right, we're gonna go ahead and put this snake back and head back to the uplands. All right, Emily's gonna do the honors. The Appalachians change very quickly as you climb away from the water, and the next habitat we wanted to explore couldn't be more different. The cedar glades are a transitional ecosystem, typically found on exposed plateaus and mountain foothills where thin soils and underlying limestone actually prevent these larger forests from taking hold. Instead of a dense canopy and constant moisture, these landscapes are open, grassy, and they're actually surprisingly harsh. Now, these glades are kind of like the sand hill of the mountains. Really nice, flat, low growth habitat. Really, this is the area where some of your rare reptiles, particularly your snakes, are going to be hanging out. The ants. Wow, some kind of native ant species. You know, it's a bit precarious when the federally protected flower is right next to my flipping rock. Can't squish these guys. It is incredibly sparse, but the species that you do find here are oftentimes incredibly rare and oftentimes endangered in that region. So there's scarlet snakes, there's pygmy rattlesnakes, there's centipede snakes. So while it may be difficult to find them, this is actually the most diverse ecosystem around, which means that searching for snakes here is very different from flipping rocks along a cool riverbank. Up here, survival favors species that are adapted to these flat rock plains. And that's exactly why it's hard to find things here at hotter times of the year. That is crazy. I just knelt down to look at this milkweed and I saw this hummingbird moth and it's being eaten by a lynx spider. This is definitely one of the craziest things that I've ever seen. That is just unbelievable. This is why I love these glades so much. There's so many really cool things just like this out here. One of my favorite habitats. Now, I actually flipped more rocks here than anywhere else on our mountain endeavor. Tons of life, beautiful scenery, and this grassland is actually a fire-adapt ecosystem, meaning it actually requires frequent burning to stay open like this. So out of all the habitats in this video, this one is certainly the rarest and the one in need of the most conservation. Brother, put your rocks back. There's only so many here. I'd like to point out that this is the best rock of the day, and if there's nothing under it, it's just a scam. Unbelievable.
It's just
unbelievable. There's never anything under any rocks ever. Snapping here, mate. It's not none of the rocks.
Yet he persists.
Snapping. Rock. There's nothing. These had to have been the best rocks I've ever flipped in my life and not produced a snake. And while we didn't see any snakes, this was actually my favorite habitat that we visited on this trip. Flipping rocks here is like gambling. It's hard to stop. You need to leave the casino. Definitely a worthwhile stop. Nothing too crazy. Time to get higher up in elevation. Now it's time to get up into the montane habitats. The Appalachians have so much to offer, from super diverse mountain vistas to mountain springs and waterfalls. But the species that we're looking for is actually going to be found more commonly in the woodland habitats. Now this area is actually stacked with vipers, particularly copperheads and timber rattlesnakes. In fact, last year there were 2 really bad venomous snake bites right in this region. But despite the amount of venomous snakes, there actually aren't a ton of rocks here. Luckily, there are these strange wooden rocks lying all over the forest floor. Log moment. Log moment, log moment. Now this is really cool. Shagbark hickory is really great for wildlife. You'll get all kinds of bats, snakes, virtually all kinds of wildlife use these, and there's a huge grove of them right here. I absolutely love the trees in this region. And one of the best things about shagbark hickories is the fact that the bark kind of peels off. And you don't really peel it back, it's attached to the tree, it's live. And you can kind of look behind it, and sometimes you can see bats or even snakes. These areas tend to be used as more active foraging areas by many species this time of year. And it took us a little while, but eventually we found our target viper. There we go. Really nice looking, in shed copperhead. I'm very used to seeing copperheads in my home state, but I don't get to see these guys too often. Now one of the key differences between these snakes and the ones back home is they've got little dots all between their little hourglass patterns, and they're a little bit darker. Even at a shed, the snake would be a little bit darker than the ones back home. Now they're a lot less common up in this range. In fact, one of the coolest things about copperheads up here is that they like to den together. In fact, they'll oftentimes den with lots of other snake species, rat snakes, timber rattlesnakes, copperheads. But in the summertime, they do tend to disperse out, and you can find them virtually anywhere. But they're mostly going to be nocturnal or hiding under logs and other little debris. Now you can see here why copperheads cause more venomous snake bites in the US than any other venomous snake. This snake is almost impossible to see in the leaf litter, and this is one of the most widespread pit vipers in the United States. They're a relative of the cottonmouth, but they're not nearly as potent, and they don't get nearly as big. Now northern copperheads are much more pocketed than their southern counterparts, and even the ones out west, but their habits and their lifestyle is a lot more similar to the broad-banded and trans-pecos copperheads. They really love, sorry buddy, they really love those big rock ledges, and they like to den up with lots of other snakes. Now you can see he's very twitchy. Copperheads are a very twitchy snake species, and it's because they eat just about anything. They're very sensitive to movement and prey. They love to eat on cicadas, mice, lizards. They'll virtually eat anything smaller than them. But some of them will have specialized diets. In fact, out here I would imagine that he'd mostly be eating small rodents and invertebrates more than lizards. Now this is one of the snakes out here that you got to be careful whenever you're flipping rocks and logs, because they can be sitting right at the edge. So you're always going to see me grabbing the tops of rocks and logs so I don't get bit. And never go and play with a copperhead. Even a dead one in the road could still be dangerous. I'm a professional, and you should not try this at home. Most of the time when I see copperheads, I just leave them alone. They're a very placid species, and I'll just let them crawl on by me, sit on their rock ledge. The only reason I'm taking this one out is to show you guys just how cool these animals really are. Northern copperheads are a great representation of everything I love about this species. They den, they use awesome mountain habitat, and they are crazy camouflage. And as you can see, they're definitely not aggressive. But that doesn't mean I want to get too close. All right, see you, bud. A lot of these animals spend so much time underground, and rocks, logs, and even artificial debris, looking under these things can give us a small glimpse into something much bigger. To me, the Appalachian Mountains are a beautiful and mysterious place, with lots of incredibly iconic and cryptic species. From these more elusive milk snakes to your incredibly common northern water snakes and copperheads. The animals we encountered on this adventure were fairly standard, but we will most certainly be returning in the near future, because I have a feeling that the Appalachian Mountains have a whole lot more to offer. Under rocks, under trees, and right under many people's noses, there are some incredible species that many of you have probably never heard of. But if you thought these Appalachian snakes were cool, make sure to check out the time where we explored Arizona's Sonoran Desert, where we got up close with its most notorious venomous snakes. Thank y'all for watching this video, and we will see you guys next time.